If you read only one comic this year, make it Koobismo. It's the comic for Mass Effect fans everywhere. They do BioWare proud. And also, I'm Chris Avellone.
Today we are joined by an industry legend whose position on IGN's list of the top 100 game developers of all time doesn't even compare to his track record with nerds like us. He is the creative mind behind Planescape Torment, Icewind Dale, Fallout 2, Fallout New Vegas, Knights of the Old Republic 2, Alpha Protocol, and most recently, Obsidian's highly anticipated release, Project Eternity. So sit back and enjoy as Koobismo goes in the workshop with Chris Avellone.
Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started in game development?
I'm Chris Avellone. I'm creative director at Obsidian Entertainment. I have been working in computer games for 19 years and a few more years in the pen and paper game industry. And I got started in game development like I imagine a lot of people do, just by being a game player first. And when I tried to run many D&D games as a kid, I discovered that no one else would game master a game. So the only way I could play and sort of vicariously enjoy the game through the other people was by being a game master. So I kept doing that year after year after year because my friends are all lazy. And eventually I took a lot of satisfaction in being a virtual game master, and up until the point where I'm like, I've got all these adventures I wrote and all these dungeons I designed, and I think they're really great. And then I kept submitting them to Dragon Magazine and Dungeon Magazine, and then I got like rejection after rejection after rejection, which gave me a lot of humility. And then eventually a game company got so desperate for a product that they eventually published one of my character books called Underworld Enemies. And then from then on, I was able to get various works published and then realized there's not a lot of money to be had in the pen and paper game industry. So I asked my editors if they knew of any quote-unquote real work that would pay more than like $50 every 2 months. And they were like, sure, we can contact some people we know at Interplay Entertainment. They just started up a D&D division. So if you wanted to apply there. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. So my editor gave me a referral. I went out there for an interview. It went well. And then I learned later on that he had traded me for $300 worth of software. And he's like, apparently Interplay had this program set up where any referral they got, they were willing to give the person a certain amount of games of a certain cash value back. So my editor got $300 worth of Interplay's titles, and I got a future career. So I consider that a pretty fair trade.
So was there anything that sort of inspired you, especially in maybe starting in pen and paper? Any person or anything that inspired you to get into game development? Or was it just sort of kind of happened?
There were a few things. I guess the whole premise of game development itself kind of appealed to me because I guess if I had an alignment, it would be like lawful neutral. And the fact you could sort of play these games of imagination or like games of pretend, but they had rules, really appealed to me. And then I was like, wow, so you could explore these made-up dungeons and have these amazing fantasy adventures, but there's all sorts of rules and random chance thrown into the mix. And that whole concept just really appealed to me. It seemed like a really interesting way to do gaming outside of like board gaming, for example. So just the concept appealed to me. And then I love doing it so much that I just kept looking for a way to turn it into an actual career. So the desire to find a job that would pay me to do that was probably the second big motivator.
So over the years, you've kind of created some pretty incredible and memorable characters. Which ones would you consider your favorites, and why, if you have any?
There was a character called Fall from Grace that we designed for Planescape Torment. And she was voiced by Jennifer Hale, who did an amazing job. And the reason I think I liked that character so much is because, like many of the concepts in Planescape, we took sort of a cliched idea and just sort of like gave it a 180-degree spin. So Fall from Grace was a succubus, but we made her a Puritan succubus in the sense that she didn't engage in, sexual contact. But what she did was she was more about just going out and, learning more about the universe, learning more about people. She was one of the wisest characters in the game. She's one of the smartest characters in the game. She was pretty powerful, and she acted as a really good sounding board for the character. And it was partly a rebellion against the game Diablo at the time, which technically isn't Diablo's fault, but when we were doing Torment, Diablo had come out, and all I would hear in the corridors after hours, and sometimes during lunchtime, and sometimes during the afternoon, was hundreds upon hundreds of succubi in Diablo dying again and again and again. And all the sound effects that they had for the succubus in Diablo were just totally like oversexed and just like over the top, and it really irritated me. So that was part of the impetus for like, you know what? I want to make a succubus that's nothing like the classic version, and then just see where that character can go. And she ended up being one of my more favorite characters to write.
Well, riffing off that, what do you feel like there are any secrets behind creating memorable characters? Do you have anything you would share with maybe other aspiring writers?
There's a set of rules for computer game characters that I use, and there's certain rules that I use for like more like novel or sort of non-computer game writing. For non-computer game writing, one of the big things that I think are important for like companion characters in like a book or a comic book is that, this is going to sound obvious, but I feel like a lot of authors miss this. Companions need to contribute to the success of the story. And this is going to be a pretty awful example, and I'm probably going to get lynched for this, like when this interview comes out. But so R.A. Salvatore did his, the whole Dritz series, and the very first book he did was The Crystal Shard, and I enjoyed it. And what I really liked about it, though, was every single character that he had in that story contributed to the success of the heroes. Like, there was no dumb character or someone who was sidelined or useless. All of them played an integral part in the success of the plot. And the fact that he made a conscious effort to make sure that each one of them like coordinated as a team, and each one of them used one of their special talents to sort of help achieve victory, I think is an important lesson for authors to take away for characters that are part of a group in any written work. And I think that can be true for computer games too. Also, I think one other way to make sort of either companions or just characters more sympathetic is to have them echo what you think the reader might be feeling or experiencing while they're reading the book. And oddly enough, the best example I have for that is the movie Aliens. Granted, it's a movie, but in the script, there's the famous line where they're just like, what we should do right now is we should totally get off this planet and nuke it from orbit. And that's like what everybody in the theater is thinking. They're like, you know what? screw fighting the aliens with guns and hand-to-hand combat. Get off the planet and drop a nuke on them. Like, everybody, like, that is the smartest thing to do in that situation. And the more you have characters and companions that actually echo like very wise courses of action like that, the more the readers are like, yeah, right on. Like, that guy is thinking exactly what I would do in that situation. And then, of course, the author's job to introduce complications that prevent that from happening. But it doesn't change the fact that companion, that character had a very smart approach to an otherwise crappy and scary situation. So that's another thing I'd probably throw out there. There's a few other things too. Like, one is if you can try and make sure that you give each character sort of a distinctive tone or slang that they use, so much so that you don't ever actually have to show that character speaking to know who's actually speaking in a scene. You just know from their word choice, like whether they use contractions or not, whether they use people's titles, whether you'll be able to tell who actually is saying the line without having to expressly say, oh, it's this person. Like, for example, like HK-47 and Nice Old Republic, like you instantly know, like without ever seeing that character, as soon as he starts speaking, you know who it is. And that's what sets him apart and makes him unique. And the more you can sort of give tags like that to a character, that works pretty well. And probably the last thing I'd throw out there is if there's ever sort of any distinctive visual look that you can give to a character, like for Knights of the Old Republic 2, we made a conscious effort for one of the antagonists, Darth Nihilus, to sort of have a very recognizable sort of like faceplate that translated well into cover images, or just sort of giving him a sort of like a distinctive appearance that would set him apart from other characters in the game. And that ended up being a huge advantage for like, you know, the when we actually got into marketing and production. Also look for things like, aside from just how that character speaks, but sort of like visual tags you can give that character too. So like if he translates into comic books or movies, there's sort of a visual hook to go along with their sort of like slang where they speak as well.
You mentioned that you have sort of different rules for writing in computer games and writing in other media. Can you talk about the differences between those two different kinds of work?
Yeah. So for computer games, because it's a different interactive experience, you have to pay a lot of attention to how that character or companion functions as part of a group. And usually that means the character has to be effective in a combat situation, to put it bluntly. If primarily the game is a lot about engaging enemies and defeating them, any sort of companion that doesn't prove its worth in that situation is not going to be someone that a player is going to want to take along, or if they take that person along, it puts them in a serious disadvantage. So first off, you want to make sure all the companions are combat effective and can actually contribute again to the success of the game. If you create characters that don't really help the player like overcome adversity in the game, then you're sort of like hamstringing that character. You're pretty much assuring that they're probably not going to choose that character in the first place. Second of all, you also want to make sure that there's other game benefits that character can provide. Like when we were doing a lot of the Fallout Vegas companions, we tried to have it set up so that the more you interacted with them, like the more experience you would get. It would open up new quest lines with those characters, help your own character grow, and sometimes even talking to various companions give you new perks or crafting recipes that help you survive better in New Vegas. So these characters, the more you sort of explore their backstories and learn more about them, you'd actually get ways of improving your own character. And sort of having that effect with people in your party is a huge advantage. It makes people want to have those characters around to sort of help their own development. Also, if the game has a theme associated with it, companions are one of the best ways to act as sort of sounding boards for that theme main character. So again, like bringing back to the New Vegas example, when I was writing Rose of Sharon Cassidy, one of the big conflicts in New Vegas is sort of the hostility between the New California Republic and Caesar's Legion. And Rose of Sharon Cassidy was supposed to initially take the role of, NCR is so great, Caesar's a bunch of thugs, like you should wipe them all out. But then the more you interact with her character, you suddenly realize that situation isn't quite as black and white as she seems to believe it is. So the more you ask her about the Legion, like she starts bringing up the fact that, merchant caravans in Legion territory usually have a lot of protection. Like they've done a lot to civilize the tribes in the area. There's not a lot of civil unrest. Crime is very harshly and effectively dealt with. And then when she starts comparing that to NCR and like, what a bunch of like, fuck ups they are. Like they can't seem to try to save their lives. Like they're terrible at enforcing laws. Like they cause chaos wherever they go. And suddenly, by the end of the conversation, she has to admit that there's actually a lot of things about the Legion actually does well compared to the NCR. And she grudgingly admits that the NCR probably isn't the best thing for the Wasteland, even though like she naturally gravitates towards them. And having that kind of character to sort of like explore the different perspectives on the factions of game, that ended up being really important too. So you want campaigns that can do that and sort of act as sort of thematic sounding boards for the player as well.
So I know this is kind of a big question with a lot of facets, but if you could just maybe speak briefly about the way that game development has changed and the industry has changed from when you started to today.
So there's been a lot of changes. I think it mostly comes to the big one is team size. I've heard of teams that can run from 60 people to 200 people to even more, and I think the trend that's been occurring is roles end up getting a lot specialized. Like when I first started in the industry, very few games actually had designers at all. Mostly, I lucked out because like Black Isle and Interplay, we did a lot of role-playing games. So they actually needed designers to help flesh out the content. But like at that time, like Blizzard didn't have designers, for example. But then like over the past 18, 19 years, like now we have all kinds of specialized designers because the technology and the game pipelines have gotten so much more complicated than they used to be. Like instead of just area designers, we have like interface designers, we have system designers, like encounter designers. Like if you're on a game like Mass Effect, for example, there's cinematic designers, and that's true for just about every single department working on a game. Like whether it's an animation, whether it's environment art, whether it's programming, like all of those departments also have their specialties as well. So I guess the big thing that's really come out of all this is that there's just a lot more specialized roles for every department, and then team sizes get larger as a result, just because there's so much more that goes into a game nowadays.
So when you co-founded Obsidian, what were you guys looking to do with that company that maybe didn't happen with Black Isle or Interplay? How did you want things to be different at the start?
The big difference is transparency.
Thank you.
We did not know a lot of the decisions that went into tasks that affected our projects, like things like the state of the company, what contracts we were pursuing, like the overall game plan was for how Interplay would sort of pull out of its downward spiral. I think when Brian Fargo was at Interplay, things were a lot different. And once he left, it was very difficult to figure out what the direction of the company was going to be. And we really didn't have much of an idea of what it was. So when we had the chance to form Obsidian, one of our ground rules was we were just going to share all of that with everybody in the company. And what our CEO Fergus does is he'll actually gather the whole company once every 2 weeks. And this is in addition to like company-wide emails he sends out, where he'll outline like all the contracts we're pursuing, what their budget requirements are, what the expectations will be for pitches we're doing or milestone requirements. And then he'll take whatever questions people have, either like at that meeting or if they want to come talk to him individually, and come talk to him individually. And his door is like always open, and he's absolutely willing to answer whatever questions people have, because he knows what it's like when you don't have that kind of access to the people that are making decisions. It just adds to a lot of confusion and a lot of questions, and I think that's one thing that we really wanted to kill at Obsidian. And I think that Fergus, more than just about anybody else, has come through and done that.
Awesome. So just how many games are you working on right now? We've got Wasteland 2, Project Eternity, South Park you mentioned. What other games might you be working on, or maybe some that we don't know about yet? And what are your roles in each game's development?
So I was juggling a lot of stuff at one time, but right now I'm only working on Project Eternity. Wasteland, my role on that is finished up. The South Park involvement was only a short period of time, and it was mostly in a producer role. So right now it's only Eternity.
That's good. Give you some extra time to come and talk to us, or whatever.
Makes life a lot more sane.
I bet. God, I can't imagine. Speaking of Project Eternity, we are so excited to see what you guys are going to do with that. Several of us have donated through Kickstarter.
Hey.
So we're taking in every bit of information that you give us on, the forums and on the Kickstarter updates. We all get emails and see it when we log into Kickstarter. But is there anything you could say about the project? Maybe a little bit of information that hasn't necessarily gone out yet. Obviously, we don't want you to tell us anything you can't tell us.
Vodka drinking bears, I think, was one of our. There's two things I think I can mention. One is we're currently in the midst of establishing the overall story, and Josh Sawyer and George Zeitz are sort of leading the charge on that. But what I'm hoping is that we can start revealing more specifics about that sometime soon. What I really like is I think Josh has established a really good theme for the first installment of the Eternity series. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing where that's going. And right now we're setting up a lore book for the world and sort of like the list of gods. And so that's been pretty cool. And it's been an unusual way to approach the story, because I don't know if we've ever actually had the chance to sort of have all the senior guys involved in the story so early on. So that's been kind of cool to see how that develops. And the other thing, which is just kind of ironic, so I'm just going to bring it up. One is the very first area screenshot we had for the game. It turns out that I don't know if people were aware of this, but Hector Espinoza is the one who helped set up that shot. And the interesting thing is he was actually doing all the painted, a number of painted backgrounds for Icewind Dale 2 way back when. So actually now his career has come full circle. He's doing back in Black Isle, he's right back to doing again. So it's been kind of interesting to see.
Wow. Okay, so we've got Project Eternity was a huge success on Kickstarter. What was the 13th game to hit 1 million, or 13th project to hit 1 million, and the third to do it in 24 hours or something like that. But with Project Eternity and Wasteland 2 being on everybody's mind, do you think there's maybe a little bit of a chance of seeing a second Alpha Protocol, or Sega still owns that IP and doesn't want to give it up yet? Or is there a chance for another contemporary spy-like RPG in the works, maybe?
It's possible, but I doubt it would come from us. Like you were saying, Sega sort of holds the rights to Alpha Protocol, and they made it pretty clear they don't want to do a sequel, which makes me a little bit sad because we had a lot of cool ideas for the sequel. But I think if an AP2 comes along, it would probably have to be a spiritual successor, and it probably wouldn't be done by Obsidian anytime soon, just because we're so busy with Eternity and Park. So we when Alpha Protocol finished up, we were all rearing to go for the second one, but I think Sega was just we don't really feel like doing a sequel. We're oh damn it, we really want to do this. No, we have fun ideas planned.
So let's move on to Fallout New Vegas, which you gave me a copy of. Thank you very much. I love the game. It's so fun. We all loved Fallout 3. It was an amazing game, but it was Fallout New Vegas that really brought back that atmosphere and that kind of the feel of the original Fallout games. Are there any insights you could give us as to how you approached New Vegas from a story perspective, and what your priorities were in making it so much like the old Fallout games? Even though there were major changes to gameplay mechanics.
There's a few things. One is the story was dictated a bit by publisher requests, which made a lot of sense to us. First off, the idea of sort of having a signature city in the game was important because they saw how well Washington, D.C. did for Fallout 3. Also, they were pretty clear that they wanted us to be on the west side of the United States and not interfere with anything going on the east side. So with that in mind, and considering that a number of us had worked on Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, which pretty much took place in the Southern California area, we decided that, okay, well, what elements, from that could we bring to New Vegas and were there any elements from the Fallout 3 that we'd been working on that we could also bring there. So I think the story, and I'm going to speak secondhand here because I wasn't actually involved with the initial stages of the story for New Vegas, except to say that I thought it'd be cool if the player died at the beginning, because I always like games that start like that, and it seemed like a good reversal from Fallout 3, because Fallout 3 starts with you being born. I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, like, you were dead and were crawling out of a grave, and then they're like, well, that sounds like a rather Chris, like, could you just not do that? So the two people that were sort of involved with the story was Josh Sawyer, our project director, and he had a lot of experience playing Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, and he had a list of stuff that he wanted to include to make it feel more like sort of like the West Coast Fallout. So things like some of the enemy types, like with like the gecko creatures you encounter really early on, like that's like a throwback to Fallout 2, and then the idea of some sort of like the reputation mechanics for like towns and factions, like he wanted to make sure that was present in New Vegas. And then our principal story guy, John Gonzalez, he did a lot of research into Vegas history and doing what he could to make the environment of New Vegas and the surrounding territories kind of just sort of like have that sort of 1950s Vegas vibe. So when you have those, that evil Sinatra-like gang, like a lot of that is like John putting his foot out there and going, you know what, here's a way to make this feel like, the 50s Vegas, but in a cool post-apocalyptic way. So Josh and John sort of collaborated on that. They looked for ways to sort of integrate the story in with the game mechanics. So the idea of having all those reputation changes amongst all the factions, like all that lended itself to like an open world story, which we thought would help reinforce the reputation mechanics that were there. And then then they just went from there, and we just started building areas and getting the faction arc squared away and figuring out like where the Brotherhood of Steel would be, and like okay, what is Vegas all about? Like what is House's master plan? Like what's the Legion like? And a lot of that was stuff we could draw upon from previous design work that we'd done in Fallout games, and some of it was brand new, and the rest of it was kind of a mix of those two things.
Before Bethesda released their version of Fallout 3, you were working on VanBuren, which was, I guess, the first take on a third Fallout game. How many ideas from that did you get to reuse in New Vegas and Bethesda's Fallout 3? The Legion reappeared in New Vegas, but are there any other things, any story elements, any gameplay mechanics, any level designs, anything?
There was a number of locations and sort of conflicts that we used from VanBuren. Some of them actually came out of our VanBuren pen and paper game we were running for a while. So some of the things that we used was in VanBuren we had the idea that prolonged use of this stealth boy technology that sort of like creates this cloaking field around characters. We introduced the idea that using that for long periods of time just drove people crazy. And because the Nightkin mutant troops that were in the earlier Fallouts, because they used stealth boys so much, they started exhibiting like various like psychological problems. So that's something that we used in New Vegas. Also, Hoover Dam was always intended to be a big location in VanBuren, although its purpose kind of mutated in New Vegas, and I think in a good way. And ended up being like sort of like the focal point, like that both factions are trying to gain control. Well, all three factions are trying to gain control of. Mm-hmm. And then there were a number of concepts that I think were mostly tied to a name or an idea that just kind of mutated when we started doing more design work on it. Like Caesar's Legion was also part of our VanBuren pen and paper game. And then Josh Sawyer ran a pen and paper game that had the Legion that had a different take on it. And then when John Gonzalez got a hold of the Legion, then he did another take on it. So basically it's still an adversarial organization, but its actual structure and how it operated kind of changed over time. Because originally the first installment of the Legion was more like if you took the crew of madmen and they're all make their quarterly profits by basically gathering slaves to meet quotas. Like that was kind of what they were all about originally. But then there's a much more Roman take on them in New Vegas, and we had areas like the Big Empty, which was like the big location in New Vegas is like Old World Blues, which originally was like this robotic military camp. But in Old World Blues, we just decided to go crazy with it and make like this crazy scientific research installation, just because we thought it would be a lot more fun to do. So yeah, basically there were some concepts that mutated and some stuff that we held on to, but it was kind of a mix of those things.
So Fallout has an incredible YouTube based, but not necessarily just YouTube, but there's a fan fiction and fan adaptation community. I know you just went to a set for a fan film, did you not?
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. But people playing and having fun with the world and the characters that you guys have created, not even necessarily just within the games, but, just throughout the universe. As someone who worked on the game and an author and, you had a major hand in all of these characters in these worlds, how do you feel about the fan fiction and the fan films and fan projects, really, that come out of this?
I think it is awesome. There's this one director, Wade Savage, who dropped me a line to say that he liked the character of the Legatlantius in New Vegas so much so that he was going to do a film based around the history of that character. And I think he still has his Indiegogo fund set up for that. And I think he already made the funding goal for it. But the whole idea that his experience with a game motivated him to make his very own feature based on that is a huge morale boost. And I think anytime creators take elements of worlds that like you've helped shape, and then they just take it into like new and better directions, it just ends up being inspiring for everybody. Like I like for the filming that I was just doing for Nuka Break, I think Zach Finfrock and the crew, they have a much better sense of comedic pacing than we do. So a lot of their web series stuff is just flat out funny. But he has such a respect for the canon that it ends up fitting quite well into the Fallout universe. And me and the Fallout creator, Tim Kaine, were discussing it while we were on the set. Tim was just like, you know what? I think that the Nuka Break guys just naturally get like the comedy level that Fallout is supposed to have. And he was pretty proud of what they were doing. So I think that was a big endorsement right there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, cool.
You've played the Mass Effect games, am I correct in assuming that?
I have played the first one.
Okay, so you have to play the other two, but we're pretty big on them around here. It's kind of our thing. But since you've only played the first one, I'll restrict my questions to that. Do you have any favorite moments from that game? Something you remember, that especially sticks out as something that like really grabbed you from the first game? Or
there are three things, and one of them is really small and one of them is really big. So I'll just start with the big one first. The very first mission that and I hope this isn't spoilers for anyone hearing, but I sort of consider it past the statute of limitations, so it's all fun. You're good.
Spoilers
just in case. Close your ears for the next minute if you're listening to this. The mission that you go to on the the ice planet's name I forget, but thank you. And when you get to the bottom of the research installation and you suddenly discover that species that was supposed to be wiped out yes, is still there, and they've actually found a way to bring that species back. And then you speak with the queen, and that is one of the clearest moments I've had in a game where I did not know what to do. I'm like, your racial history has indicated that you are one of the largest threats to the galaxy, because at this point I don't know the Reapers exist, and I'm not sure it's a good idea to let you go out and breed or let you escape this installation. But at the same time, it is clearly a very evil thing to wipe out a species, and I'm like, I did not know what to do. But I was essentially like, you know what? Damn the consequences. I have a really bad feeling about this, but I'm going to let them go.
There you go.
But then there was that encounter I had out in like deep space where suddenly there was like another colony of them, and I'm like, oh, did I cause this? Like, oh shit. But anyway, the point is, like, when I hit that dilemma, I had no idea what to do, and I love being presented with dilemmas like that. So that was pretty good. The other thing is I really liked just dealing with the character of Rex in general. I loved his voice thing. I loved his character arc. I love the fact that, his species had basically been, castrated. So they, they were the last generation, supposedly. And I thought that was a really cool character arc to be part of a defeatist race, who's just sort of making their last stand there. I thought that was pretty cool. And the very last thing is the very first time I heard an Elcor speak, I thought that was fucking cool. I was like BioWare does this with a lot of their alien races. Like, I do not know who their audio engineer was for the Elcor, but they sounded awesome. And for Knights of the Republic 1, the creatures that inhabit Manon, maybe Manonites, I don't know. I forget their names, and I'm probably going to burn in. But and they had a really great take for their alien language voice. But the Elcor, I almost just wanted to have them on loop because I just really liked the way they sounded. I just thought they sounded really freaking cool. But yeah, those are some of the stuff that stands out to me.
Okay, so while we were doing a little bit of research for the interview, our dear Koobs was kind of going on and on about the fact that he's going on about the fact that you had mentioned that you would love to create an RPG similar to The Wire, as well as possibly Firefly, which would be amazing.
Hell yeah.
So as far-fetched as those ideas may be at sometimes, is there anything else you'd like to see developed into maybe like a real quote-unquote RPG game?
I'm tempted to say Doctor Who, but I don't think it would work because because the structure of that universe, the Doctor kind of knows everything. So doing an RPG based on that, I think, would be a little difficult. And plus, the fact is, I'm not exactly sure how you would customize your character unless possibly he went through a regeneration cycle and you could, well, maybe that would work. Okay. Oh, sorry. Now I'm okay. Well, you know what? Actually, then a Doctor Who RPG is something that I would be interested in.
Oh, man.
Well, and speaking on that topic, game adaptations of these sort of non-game worlds and franchises it's kind of a tough thing, and it runs into some issues with fans and stuff like that. But you guys have some really great experience working in with, especially Star Wars and Knights of the Old Republic 2, characters like Kreia, that your take on the Force is phenomenal. How do you approach a franchise that's established that way? It's something, and developing out of somebody else's universe, but also trying to make it your own.
The way we try and approach it is we first get access to all the material that's been created for that universe, and then we just spend a long period of time devouring it. For Star Wars, for example, I read every single Star Wars book I could get my hands on. I went through all the graphic novels and comic series. I, of course, watched the movies a bunch of times, and then I endured the Christmas special. So after going through all that, you have a perspective into the Star Wars universe and how George Lucas creates characters and the dialogue style. And also equally important, you have a sense of what stories have already been told in that universe and what stories people responded to. In my case, I was left with a lot of questions. And so I used a lot of those questions to sort of formulate a new story in the Star Wars universe. Like we were doing Knights of the Old Republic 2, two of the principal characters in that game sort of embody all my questions that I have about the Force and why I alternately like the Force and alternately why I hate the Force. And so one of the companion characters in that game basically keeps asking the player a lot of questions about how to approach the dark side and the light side, and is one side truly better than the other, and are there principles from both that can actually give your life meaning, and and is following the Force even the right thing to do at all. So she asks a lot of blasphemous questions throughout the game, but all of that ended up being good meat and fuel for the story, so that ended up working out pretty well. And then we had another antagonist that basically represented like what totally surrendering yourself to the Force meant. And in addition to being incredibly powerful, like he sort of like lost all of his individuality and his sense of actually being a personality anymore at all, which sort of makes me it's sort of how I feel about people that sort of surrender themselves to the Force in the Star Wars universe. But yeah, basically, you do a lot of research in the franchise, absorb as much as you can, get a sense for what people really responded to, and then also form your own questions and own sort of like your own direction for how you want things to proceed. And then like that usually ends up creating the skeleton of our stories.
Well, so aside from working in video games, you've also done work on Star Wars and Fallout comics. Can you tell us a little bit about that medium and what it's like working there?
Yeah, working on comics for Star Wars and Fallout was a huge surprise for both. I don't know if Dark Horse realized at the time exactly how much games could help their product line, but the Old Republic comics are doing very well for them. The BioWare series of comics, both Dragon Age and Mass Effect have done very well for them. But I had a chance to know Dave Marshall, sort of like the editor of sort of like the game line of comics for a while, and so I asked him if I could do scripts for like the Clone Wars adventures, and he was totally up for that. And I'll be honest, like BioWare had kind of already paved the way for like their authors doing scripts and doing like successful stories for Dark Horse, so they kind of like got over a lot of the obstacles for me already. So Dave was already open to that discussion before I had it with him, and he was. So I did a few scripts for Star Wars, and then that was such a good experience that when we were doing New Vegas and we were looking for sort of new ways to promote the game, I just kind of threw out there, hey, well, Dark Horse is always up for doing comics or graphic novels in the Fallout universe. And my hope was that they would actually make a Fallout series based on it. But I don't think Bethesda wanted to do that. But they were open to the idea, their marketing department sort of backing like a game-specific graphic novel. So I did this story called All Roads for New Vegas, which sort of tells the story of Matthew Perry's character before he actually meets the player in the game. So it sort of like ends up being like the prologue to the start of the game, which was kind of fun to do. But a lot of that was based on my previous work that I'd had with Dave, and he already saw the potential in tying in comics to a lot of the game franchises out there and how they could support each other.
So we've heard that you've said to people as they're asking you, how do I break in to gaming and the gaming industry? You've mentioned that a good way to start is to cruise around Kickstarter and look for people who need help, offer services to those sort of folks who are just starting out. Is there anything else you might tell people who are looking for a way to break in?
Yeah, that Kickstarter suggestion came about because I know that the budgets that people get for those games aren't very large compared to publisher-backed games, and they really do need all the support they can get, because usually a publisher will provide things like quality assurance, community support, a lot of other elements that are really, really important to a game. So the idea that someone will be willing to be out there and volunteer things like localization services or helping you translate your game, all of that ends up being very, very important for a Kickstarter. And being able to do that for a game looks great in your resume. Aside from that, though, there's a few other things you can do. One is a lot of games coming out always have like mod tools associated with them, and New Vegas and Fallout 3 and just about every Bethesda project that's come out, and the BioWare games as well, they usually release an editor that allows you to create your own content for those games. And if you actually go out there and create a mod that's really popular, usually the devs are on the lookout for things like that just to see what people are doing with the game. For example, when we were doing like Old World Blues, which was a DLC for New Vegas, we actually went through all the mods that people had done for New Vegas, and we tried to look for patterns for things that people wanted to see. And one of the things we noticed was there were a lot of people out there that were making home base mods, and like they were doing some amazing stuff with these bases that we had never even occurred to us. But the fact that it seemed that people were really missing that, or they didn't necessarily like the level of home base that was currently in New Vegas. We're like, hey, well, why don't we take all these things, all these ideas, try to see if there's more stuff that we can add to it, and then we'll try and make that sort of the focal point of our DLC and more content. But because we were able to see the actual community generate that content, that ended up being something that actually helped guide our development. And also, one last thing is we also pay attention to a lot of modern scripters that do work that we would like to directly hire them for. So, for example, for Neverwinter Nights 2, for one of our expansion packs, we actually contacted a guy who'd written some incredibly great AI coding for the monsters in Neverwinter Nights, and we actually used his code and scripting for our AI system in Neverwinter Nights 2, which worked out great for both of us. And for New Vegas, when we were actually hiring for the world builder position, we actually got a resume from a modder called Oscuro, who'd done like this complete overhaul of Oblivion in his spare time. In his spare time, he rebuilt the world in his spare time. That's exactly the kind of applicant. So he dropped us a resume. His mod had been like downloaded like 100,000 times. Like the user score was like 9.7. He'd done like patch notes and iterations, and I'm like, you've already done the job that we're hiring you for, and you're so now we would just like to pay you for it. And he's like, all right. So he came on board for. He did a great job. He's currently working on South Park and our other titles, and it was a good fit. But because he had access to those mod tools and create his own content, that helped him stand out and made him a really good applicant.
Another question I wanted to add to, not necessarily that, but on the subject of Kickstarter, what would you say has been most instrumental in like indie video games kind of getting started and getting out there and people seeing it, playing it?
Digital distribution. I think there was such a bottleneck in that you had to get a publisher to manufacture like covers and discs for people in the past that the internet completely removes. Like people can just simply download the game now. And I think that between Steam and other services, it's a lot easier to get a hold of a indie title that you otherwise wouldn't have access to in the past. So I think digital distribution has been a huge plus with that. And plus, there's also a lot more game development programs out there that people can use to actually help create content. In addition to like the publisher hurdle of having like manufacture like discs and the covers and the boxes and things like that, the idea of coding a game from scratch was also very, very difficult. But now there's a lot of tools out there to help with that, whether it's Unity or whatever. And I think that's allowed for a lot more game ideas to surface, which I think is just good for everybody.
I agree. Awesome. Let's talk about your convention life, because it does kind of seem to comprise quite a bit of your professional time. So you go to a lot of conventions and conferences, just from my own noticing, just since I've known you, and kind of all over the world. What has been your favorite of all of these that you've been to, and why?
That is really tough. I like them all, but for different reasons. So overall, I think at every convention, just about everybody I meet is pretty cool, and I think that's because usually they're gamers, and gamers by nature is very, very cool. I think the most fulfilling convention or conventions that I go to usually ends up being the PAX conventions. The reason I say fulfilling is because usually there's a lot more panels about how to get into the industry and what sort of classes to take or what skill sets you should develop. And also, I don't know why this is, but also in addition to the questions that people ask during those panels, I'm usually able to talk with the audience for at least an hour after that and actually answer people's individual questions about that. And I feel that ends up being a lot more helpful to them about making decisions to get into game development than sort of like the more general presentations. So I do enjoy PAX, and so PAX has a lot of gamers that just go to it that are just there because they love games, and that sort of creates like a much different atmosphere than say like the Game Developers Conference. Every convention has something that I like about it. I think that Dragon Con, I think, is the most passionate convention I've been to, and I definitely want to go back every year because it's awesome. And if you don't go to Dragon, If you ever want to see your game characters being given life by people who know how to make costumes, how to model the art, that is the go to, and the people are awesome. I do enjoy. I'm sorry. Actually, it actually got canceled. I think this year they used to have this thing in Austin called GDC Online, which was pretty awesome because they had a narrative track, and it was all just the narrative designers sat down and traded war stories and shared experiences, and so it was much more of like a writing focused convention. So that was pretty cool. I think they're going to move it to San Francisco next year, but the fact that it won't be in Austin anymore makes me really sad. But overall, those are just some of the ones I enjoy.
Do you have any favorite memories from any convention or conference, and what would be your worst experience you've ever had at one of them?
Wow, that's a loaded wow.
That's why we asked that.
So I realized that I was not qualified to give environment artists advice when someone asked a question during one of the panels, and then the very next person that came to ask a question just told me flat out that I was wrong, and then and then he gave the answer. And I thanked him for that. And I'm like, if you could drop me an email and run me through some of these suggestions, I would love to be able to give the correct advice to people. And I thanked him for that. And he was pretty cool about it. But I really appreciate him letting me know. I just felt really embarrassed. And then I felt bad for anyone else I might have given bad advice to. So it was the best experience. One of the best experiences was at PAX East. We just done a transgender issues gaming panel, and then one of the audience members came up to me to say that he really enjoyed the take on sexuality of one of the characters in New Vegas, and the character was Arcade Gannon. And one of the nice things that he enjoyed about Arcade was that Arcade was gay, but that wasn't the focus of his character. It was more like just a sideline element about his personality. And he said that he basically appreciated the fact that, like, that it was sort of treated in a more this is normal kind of way, as opposed to it being like the big billboard sign that you sometimes see for some characters. Like that's the only thing about them that makes them stand out, which is kind of, I think, equally potentially insulting if you take that particular take on a character. But I think because Arcade kept it pretty low key, and it was just more like, hey, this is just part of my personality, and it's it's normal, it's matter of fact, I think ended up really resonating with him, and to see someone have that kind of reaction to it, I think was really cool.
See, so you're off to Brazil in a few days for another convention. Will you be speaking at that convention? And if you're not, whose lectures or panels or things that you really can't miss?
I am speaking there. It is the Brazilian Independent Games Festival, and Jason Della Roca, who used to be the head of the International Game Developers Association, he got me in touch with some of the organizers down there, and then they invited me to be a keynote speaker for the first day. So I'm going to go down there and talk about why I love Kickstarter so much.
Because it raises me $4 million.
I hope it changes the industry forever. And now that I saw Robert's game, I think it got over like $6 million. I'm like, yes, it's getting players can start playing games, and that's the only financing that developers will need from then on.
It would be nice.
That is my.
Okay, so other than playing games and partaking of beverages not of a non-alcoholic sort, what are your favorite things to do in your admittedly limited spare time?
I like to draw cartoons. It's a good form of stress relief. I also watch both good and bad science fiction TV shows. And I try to go to the gym, but it's been a little bit harder recently, so that's kind of slacked off. But I'm sure once the next year hits, I'll be right back up on it again. I also trying to do more writing outside of video games. Like this is kind of game related, but I have a novella that I'm working on for Wasteland 2, and then also there's going to be a novella for Eternity. I've never actually written a novella before, so that's going to be a new experience. I'm kind of excited about that.
Cool.
And apparently, I have a budding acting career in.
Yes.
Terrible. Wait till you see this. The Nuka Break season 2. Me and Tim Kaine got cameos in that, so you can watch our terrible acting. That, and then I lucked out and got a cameo in the Guild, which was awesome. And when Felicia Day asked, and I'm like, I just responded with all caps, like, hell yes, I would love. So I got a little spot on there. So I don't know if that'll keep going in other web series, but just being asked was kind of cool.
That's really cool. So now what we're gonna do, since we've kind of reached the end of our bulky questions, we're gonna do a little new thing that we're doing. Lots of doing right now, called Turbo Questions. Just short little things. We're going to throw the question out, and you give us the first thing that comes to your head. I don't care how appropriate or inappropriate it is, just blurt it out. So we'll start with this one. Best soundtrack of all time.
Fight Club.
Favorite games to play? And no, they don't have to be your own.
Shay Geek.
Is there anyone left in the gaming industry you haven't met yet that you're still dying to meet?
Ken Levine with a conditional.
Didn't you say he wasn't speaking to you anymore or something?
I've actually met him a number of times, but we never have a chance to talk. And
really?
so I have met him, and we haven't talked for real, and it's driving me crazy.
Okay. Ken, note to self. If you could approve the creation of any sequel to any game ever, regardless of who owns the IP, what game would it be?
I don't wait. System Shock 3.
Game mechanic or feature that has long overstayed its welcome in today's games and should be purged and never seen again and killed with fire.
I would like to see West Compass go away.
Best indie game you've ever played or indie game you've yet to play but you're excited about?
One I have, Amnesia: The Dark Descent is one that I have played. One that I'm looking forward to that I haven't played. FTL.
Will you check out the Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition coming out this month?
Yes, and I pre-ordered it. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. What do you think about our little comic series so far that our dear Koobs has worked so hard on, and our fellow artists and voice actors and everyone involved?
BioWare should be honored. So I wasn't sure what to expect because I haven't been a follower of it. Then I started reading it recently, and I was actually really, really touched by some of the comics. I thought that the usually when I see adaptations, they aren't quite as touching and heartfelt. And one thing I really liked was the suggestions for the soundtracks for each of the comics. I thought that was a really cool way of sort of giving the ambience and sort of what the authors and the artists are thinking when you're actually reading the comic. And I thought that was super cool. I'm a little sad because I jumped to one of the end comics first, and I ran to a death scene immediately, and I'm like, wait a minute. And then like when I got to the end, I was really touched. I felt really bad because it sad for the characters, and I'm like, wow, that was really well done. And then I'm like, wow, it's been a while since a comic has actually sparked an emotional reaction that wasn't discussed.
Yeah, Chris, what would you say you have in the future pending? What's your next big thing?
So this will be weird, but I think the future holds the past. That because Kickstarter allowed us to go back to doing an isometric like Baldur's Gate style game, I think that we're going to be doing a number of installments of games like that because a lot of people at the studio, myself included, just really like working on those for a lot of reasons. So I think that we're going to go back down nostalgia road for a while and sort of re-explore those games, but not the way they were towards the end of Black Isle, but more now that we have more time and the player backing and the sort of more freedom to breathe with those in our own world, I think that's going to be the future.
You wonderful creature.
Aww.
Thank you for coming on to our little podcast interview thing and spending so much time with us. And
thank you. Awesome questions. It's much different than what I usually get asked. I appreciate it.
We made a point to do that, actually.
Because sometimes you'll get the same questions again and again, and it makes you want to tear your hair out. And then the questions you asked were things that kept my hair in, which is really important these days.